What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we are continuing on the Land Before Time series that I've been slowly trudging through with my buddy Mike of Did You See That. You guys can find the rest of the videos we've done here on the channel. There's a playlist called The Land Before Time where we covered the other 11 films, and there are 2 more to go after this. So without further ado, let's get into this review for The Land Before Time 12, The Great Day of Flyers. Once again directed by Charles Grosvenor, who pretty much stopped his career just to make the Land Before Time movies. This film once again stars people like John Ingle, Aria, Noelle, Curzon, Rob Paulsen, Cameron Manheim, and for the very first time and only time as Littlefoot, Nick Price. And before we get too far into this, I'd like to say a big thanks to my guest here in these videos, and that is my buddy Mike of Did You See That. As usual, you guys can find the link to any of my guests down below in the description box, so go give him some love and let him know I sent you. We're going to be hearing his thoughts now on the 12th installment in the franchise in just a few moments, but let's go ahead and get into my thoughts initially on this movie. If you guys have been following my thoughts on this series thus far, you know that after the original film, they've all been pretty similar, with a couple of movies in the franchise standing out in terms of their plot. Typically, there's something that comes up that ends up threatening the livelihood of our characters in the Great Valley, the area that they call home, and now the parents tend to be the ones that are frantic, with the kids finding some way to kind of resolve the situation. And we've had a couple of installments in the mix that have kind of changed up the formula, giving us some more emotional beats, like the one where Littlefoot meets his father, or even the last film where it was more about protecting these smaller dinosaurs. Well, here we are with this one that actually hones in more on the character of Petrie, played by Jeff Bennett throughout the majority of this series. And Petrie is a nervous character. He tends to not really believe in himself. He tends to be the one who's afraid of a lot of things when they go out on these adventures. And the movie opens up and he and his brothers and sisters are practicing a flight formation as there is something coming up called the Day of Flyers. And on this day, all of the various flying dinosaurs, specifically the pterodons or the pterodactyls as we see in these movies, have to fly together in a formation, showcasing that they can work together and that they have learned how to fly together. And the other older flying dinosaurs end up judging them and pretty much kind of give them their stamp of approval that they've kind of grown up. And so this is the biggest plot point throughout the course of the movie, is that Petrie is trying to build up the confidence and build up the stamina, if you will, to keep up with his brothers and sisters and actually showcase to them that he can fit into the group. However, he continually is making a lot of mistakes, which has his brothers and sisters pushing him away, and he consistently feels like an outsider. Rob Paulsen is an actor who's been a consistent voice actor throughout these movies, playing tons of small characters, but most notably playing the character of Spike. And in this film, he also plays Mr. Clubtail, who we have seen in previous films, but most notably a new character in the franchise named Guido. And I can pretty much tell you that the accent that you're thinking that Guido is given is exactly that. And so Guido is this character who appears in the Great Valley, doesn't really know how he got there, doesn't really have anybody around him. He doesn't know what kind of dinosaur he is. He's never met anybody who's like him before. He doesn't have any family. He doesn't have any friends. He doesn't have a herd. And he ends up meeting Littlefoot and the gang. They end up bringing him into their group, trying to find him a herd, seeing if he fits in with the various dinosaurs. And then it turns out he actually fits in with Petrie and his family. And most notably, Petrie originally wants him to join his family simply because they can be outsiders together. But of course, it's obvious to us viewers that Guido is a dinosaur who can fly, as he has wings, but he's unfamiliar with the idea of flying and has no idea that he himself can fly because he doesn't look traditionally like a pterodon or a pterodactyl. And so Petrie now has Guido to kind of lean on in terms of that other outsider in the group, and Guido has kind of made it his kind of goal to help Petrie get where he needs to be so he can succeed on the Day of the Flyers. While this is all going on as well, last movie we were introduced to Tria, which is the love interest of Sarah's dad, Topsy, which is the first time we actually heard his name, and I love the fact that his name is Topsy, even though he acts super tough. And this movie opens up and there's an egg. They're having a hatchling. A new dinosaur is going to be coming into their family, a new 3-horn, a triceratops named Trisha, a young little cute small pink dinosaur who is the young sister now of Sarah. And Sarah is struggling with this because she feels now like the outsider in her family. It feels like her dad and Tria, his now wife, are more focused on the new baby versus her. This is the classic thing we've seen in various films over the course of years, and Sarah kind of has to learn to deal with that over the course of the film. But over the course of the film also starts to build a bond with Trisha, her new sister, showcasing that she wasn't really the outsider, but that there's a new baby in the family that needs the new attention, needs the new love, and Sarah starts to fall into that sister role, with Sarah being probably the most likable she's ever been in the franchise in this one movie. And then the thing that we were all expecting was that Guido would eventually fly, but this is the portion of the film that I felt take a little bit too long to kind of showcase. But Guido ends up sleepwalking at one point and ends up walking, and Littlefoot and the gang decide to just follow him everywhere that he's going, trying to avoid him from falling into any sort of disaster, like a lake or lava, or falling off the edge of a cliff. And at one point when he does in fact fall off the edge of the cliff, it turns out that Guido can fly. He flies while he's sleepwalking, and when he wakes up they end up letting him know, you actually can fly. And this movie at its core is all about kind of finding your identity within a community and trying to have your own unique energy, and how that's okay to maybe feel like an outsider, but the reality being that we all have these various things that make us unique within our community. And in the case of Petrie, who is the central character in this film, he recognizes that he flies a certain way, he is a good flyer, but just because he doesn't fall into formation with everybody else and does what everybody else does the way that they want him to, it doesn't make him any less of a flyer, it doesn't make him any less better than any of these other individuals. And that's the overall message of the film. I think like a lot of these Land Before Time films, there's typically some nice takeaway that kids can have from these films, and even as a 30-year-old adult, I can still watch a movie like this and appreciate a nice message that people can take away from this film. Similar to the other ones, these movies are for kids, so there's an element of it that's goofy and cheesy, and there's an element of it that's really corny, but at this point, I think the enjoyment for this franchise for me has come with just seeing these characters once again, as I really do enjoy Littlefoot, Sarah, Ducky, Spike, Petrie, and the gang, and whatever new characters they typically meet, and typically have an enjoyment on that level. There is a charm and a cuteness to this, with great moments of humor between the characters that I really enjoy in terms of their banter. Similar to the other films, you do have a jam-packed amount of musical numbers that in this film for me didn't really work. I didn't really necessarily have any of the musical numbers I really liked in this film. A lot of times it's an ironic enjoyment where I can kind of sing them because they're kind of catchy, and me and my fiance will watch the movie and ironically sing some of these goofy songs and at least have an enjoyment of it on that level. But this one didn't really have any musical numbers that really stuck with me personally. But again, this movie is not made for me. It was made for kids. This movie came out in 2006 and I was about the age of 13 around that time. So it is kind of crazy to think about these movies coming out for kids at the time when I had already kind of moved on from them. With all that said, I do want to speak a little bit more on a couple of things, but before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Mike of Did You See That? And then we'll get back to my thoughts in just a moment.
Anthony, what's going on, man? Thank you so much for having me back for the 12th installment in the Land Before Time series. This one called The Great Day of the Flies. And before coming onto this review, I kept muddling up that title. But yeah, as always, I'm not going to go into kind of plot or anything like that. Anthony's probably covered all that good stuff, so I'm just going to get right down to it and not take up too much of your time. Definitely going to say this one was a massive improvement over the 11th installment, for me personally anyway. But going into this, the positives I can say right away is that at least Petrie gets some character development in terms of the Great Day of the Flies. The movie is mainly focused on that character this time, and a little bit more about him actually growing up, which after all these Land Before Time movies, none of the characters have ever seemed to have changed, grown taller. There's no difference to them, at all. And I know it's all, different years compared to human years, but you still think there would be some kind of grown up there. But this movie definitely has a little bit of that, which was nice to actually see. Sarah is probably the most likable she's been in this entire series. I mean, don't get me wrong, she's still a stone cold bitch, but at least she is kind of a little bit more likable, and there's actually a new addition to her family this time, so it's actually nice to see that actually spending some time to develop her and her family and give us a little bit more maybe to care about to an extent. So I actually like that, the new addition of Trisha, I believe that the little baby is called. cute. I definitely would be intrigued to see where that character goes. And again, at least there's a bit more character development to our characters. It only took 12 movies, but we finally got there. The animation also at times looks a lot better than it has. Of course, it's around 2006, this movie, so you would expect it to have at least gotten a little bit better. But going straight into those negatives, and when I mentioned about the animation, for most part it looks good, but there was definitely a couple of times it did not match up with the rest of the animation, at least not the version that I saw of this movie. There was times where it looked like really crystal clear and it looked like really good and looked, you know, better than it has done. Then there was times where it didn't, and I was like, well, why is there a big difference in the animation style? Also, we've got a new character here called Guido. At times, I don't mind the new character. I think it's, like, you know, an okay, cool addition to this movie. Where that character will go after this, I mean, I don't know. But there's definitely times where the dialogue on that character isn't the best, or maybe it does speak a little bit too much than what it actually needed to. The music, once again, isn't great. One of a kind, well, it was actually okay, but the music, again, nothing to rave home about. And kind of ultimately, what I'm going to wrap this up and to say is this is kind of like another rinse and repeat in our story of the Great Valley. Nothing big happening, nothing like kind of grand scale, no kind of like characters dying off or any big changes to the landscape where it's really going to get you back into this world and like really sucked in and invested, and, you know, maybe being like a big shock to this series. They're going to play it safe. It's for kids. So, yep, this is kind of like another rinse and repeat story, but at least it was okay. I was at least mildly entertained with this one. So, Anthony, back over to you, my man. Thank you once again for having me on, and I'll see you on the 13th installment.
A big thanks to Mike for joining me here in this video. Dude, it's been a pleasure to have you in all of these. We only have 2 more to go. And I was just texting Mike just before filming this that I learned that there is actually a The Land Before Time TV series that had a little over 20 episodes. I'm going to purchase the DVD collection pack of that so that I can watch through that and cover it here on the channel as well for anybody who's interested. But I will say that I am not going to be having Mike on. I was texting him about it. I know he's not interested in it. I know he's ready to wrap this series up. So I will be continuing on the series for the TV show portion after we finish the movies on my own. But with all that said, a big thanks to Mike for joining me up to this point. We are 12 movies deep with 2 more to go, and you guys can find the link to his channel down below in the description box, so go give him some love, let him know I sent you, and let's go ahead and wrap up my thoughts now here on The Great Day of Flyers. Like I mentioned before, this film has a nice message about inclusivity, a nice message about finding your own unique energy within a community, and how it's okay to recognize that even though you might feel like an outsider, you, at the end of the day, aren't. We all feel like outsiders at times, typically because we all have these different things that a lot of times we don't want to rise to the surface and show because we feel like people will judge us. And I like that this movie has that message. It's something I could definitely relate to, as when I was growing up, I oftentimes felt like an outsider, and even though I have a lot of friends, I have a lot of family, and I get along with most people that I speak to, and I feel like I'm, you know, a pretty personable individual, I do recognize sometimes I do feel like an outsider, and it's easy to tell ourselves that we are the outsider. And this film at its core is about embracing that part that makes you an outsider, and in turn kind of recognizing that you aren't as much of an outsider as you think. You're not as alone as you might think you are. And I think at its core, this movie really hits the nail on the head when it comes to that story. As for the new character of Guido, I think it's hilarious that he's named Guido. I also think it's hilarious that they gave him the accent that they gave him. Rob Paulsen is an incredible voice actor, and anytime I hear him, my mind instantly goes back to Pinky from Pinky and the Brain, and I've seen him in tons and tons of other things. Every time I hear his voice, I instantly know it's Rob Paulsen. He's been a consistent voice actor throughout the entirety of this series, and I look forward to hearing what other voice characters he does over the course of time. As I mentioned before, Littlefoot is recast once again, this time by Nick Price, and this is like the second, third, maybe fourth time that they've changed the character's voice actor, which kind of sucks. There was one guy who played him throughout the earlier part of the series for majority of the films, and it is a shame at this point that they haven't kept a consistent voice actor like they have with the other characters. Even though all of them have changed at some point for the most part, it is kind of a shame to consistently feel like Littlefoot doesn't feel as consistent as the rest of the characters. With that said, though, I do think Nick Price did a better job than the voice actor who played him in the 11th film. I found that this version of the character felt a little bit more in line with the character of the past. With that said, though, overall, these movies are made for kids. They're cheesy movies of their time, and I enjoy them on that level. I don't think that this is a great movie, and clocking in at an hour and 20 minutes, this is one of the longer films in the the franchise, and I genuinely don't think it necessarily needed to be. This is easily a movie that could have been shaved down by about 10 or 15 minutes, with the portion of the film that felt that it dragged on the most being the entire sequence with Guido sleepwalking. It felt like that was going on and on and on for far longer than it needed to, just to prove the point that he can fly, even though we as an audience pretty much know that that's going to be the case. With all that said, though, again, these movies are not made for me. They're not made for Mike. They were made for kids at that time. And even though we were kids at that time, we didn't appreciate them or watch them at that time. So to watch a movie like this all these years later, of course, I have to recognize that these are for kids. But I think there's a lot of fun to be had. I think there's a lot of charming elements and nice messages that this film has. And I don't think that this is one of the worst in the franchise, but nor do I think it's one of the best. I would say it's somewhere in the middle of the road for me, but overall, it's enjoyable to get back with these characters, and I look forward to wrapping up this series with the last 2 movies. So are you a fan of The Day of Great Flyers? Have you seen this movie? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. And also, don't forget to go down below in the description box and go and give my buddy Mike of Did You See That some love and let him know I sent you. Alright guys, we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.